Today, I want to talk about this feeling of weakness and God's strength. When we have little strength, but we have a big, big God. When my kids were little, we used to sing the song, My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. I sometimes forget that as a grown up with my grown up problems. Want us to dive into Second Corinthians 12:10, and it says this, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Okay, so I was reading through this and hit on the word delight. I'll be honest, I don't wake up in the morning and say, Yay, I get to face my difficulties another day. No, sometimes I just want to break. And I grumble and I complain and I think, why am I dealing with this issue again? Or why do I get so hurt when things don't go my way? Or why do the situations in my life seem to persist and they weigh so heavy? Do I delight in them? No, I don't. But when I was writing my book, Reframing Rejection, How Looking Through a Different Lens Changes Everything, one of the lenses that God led me through was this word to delight in Him and to let Him delight in me. As I dove into the meaning of the word delight, I discovered that the Hebrew word shaphat means to bend or to lean. If I take that concept, that understanding of delight doesn't always mean, woohoo, I'm so excited. Or, oh, this is the most delightful cup of coffee I've had in a long time. But if I think about delighting as leaning into my difficulties, leaning into my hardships, leaning into the persecutions, then I discover that I'm delighting for Christ's sake, so his power can rest on me. His power is made perfect or complete in my weakness. And why would I deny that opportunity to see God's power work in me by shying away from my difficulties and my hardships? So it gives us a complete different little twist or a different, we're flipping the script on how we look at our difficulties. Just before this, where Paul talks about his thorns, and he prayed 3 times for his thorn to be removed. But God said no. Thorns are personal weaknesses and difficulties. They're not sinful traits and actions. They're not those decisions that we make that take us away from God's commands to holy living, to allow him to be Lord and the authority in our life. No, these thorns are, maybe we have a physical weakness. Maybe we struggle with depression and anxiety. Maybe we struggle with choices that our families have made. Maybe we are dealing with consequences from our choices from the past. Those are our personal weaknesses and difficulties, and these are the thorns that Paul is talking about. Paul doesn't focus on what the thorns are. In fact, he doesn't even say what his thorns are, because his focus was not on his thorns, but on God's strength. What a lesson that we can learn from Paul is, rather than focusing on what's wrong in our life, the difficulties, the persecutions, the hardships, the sorrows, the frustrations, we can focus on God's greatness, God's bigness. Paul says that his grace is sufficient. What is grace? It is God favoring us with his presence, love, help, and power. To those who depend on him and call on him for help. And the greater our thorns, the greater God's grace in our life. We can acknowledge our hardships and our difficulties, but when we choose to fixate on God's help, presence in our life, we discover the strength that we need to face each day. We can then experience the peace of God, even in the midst of a chaotic moment, a chaotic week, a chaotic month. We wouldn't let our weaknesses be the driving force in our days, but instead, God's strength would be the driving force in our days. So, what can we do? Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that You can ignore all of your hardships and difficulties and persecutions because we can't. That's our life. That's what we face day in and day out. But we also have an everlasting God who doesn't grow tired, who doesn't grow weary, whose understanding we can lean on. He gives strength when we're weary. He increases our power when we're weak. When we stumble and fall, He's there to pick us back up and to renew our strength. He promises to give us strength and refreshment when we're exhausted. He gives us the ability to rise above our difficulties. And He enables us to run spiritually, making steady progress without giving up. So, how do we translate this into our everyday life? How can we focus on God and to lean into our hardships and difficulties so that His power is made complete in our weaknesses? Well, we can trust Him completely with our life. Now, what is trust? It's a confident expectation. God is a promise keeping God. Trust is assurance, and it's the certainty that God is going to keep His word, that He is reliable, that we can count on Him to work behind the scenes. We can count on Him to work when we are stuck in that waiting room. We can count on Him to work as our defender when we're dealing with persecutions and attacks on our character. So we can trust Him completely with our life. That's the first step to having His strength made perfect in our weakness. Secondly, we can serve Him faithfully. Now, faithful means to have a loyal, devoted, obedient heart, a heart that's hardcore beating and chasing after God's ways. And thirdly, we can turn to Him quickly as our source of help. When we're facing difficulties, if we just hinge towards Him right away, hinge towards Him immediately, till we set our course toward Him, to give Him our attention and interest. Then we come back to where Paul prayed for his thorns to be removed, but God said, "No, my grace is sufficient for you." And so he focused on God's presence and help in his life. And we can too, through trusting Him, serving Him faithfully, turning to Him quickly as our source of help. So today, whatever it is you're facing, I'm going to pray that you would lean into your weaknesses, not to make them bigger in your life, but to make God bigger in your life. To say, "God, I have this difficulty. I'm not excited about living through it, but I know that if I lean towards it, you're going to meet me there. And your grace is going to be sufficient for me. And I'm going to see you at work in my heart, in my mind, in my attitude, and in my actions." And that's how we have grace that is sufficient for each day.